Sketchbooks are a really valuable part of my art practice, even after I have finished the sketchbook. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about two ways I use my sketchbooks, both my current ones and the sketchbooks and sketches that I've finished, to keep me inspired and to also prevent things like art block. Art block manifests in different ways for different people and has different causes for different people, so there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution to art block. The things that I'll be talking about in this video are more for helping with the inspiration side of things, and they help me in my art practice, so I'm super happy to share them with you. And I encourage you to experiment with all the different information out there without becoming overwhelmed, hopefully, and find what works and what doesn't work for you in your practice. With that all said and done, let's get into the first thing. For this first thing, I like to grab a sketchbook, and it can be one that I am currently using, it could be one that I recently completed, or it could be a really old sketchbook, or I might grab a couple sometimes. And I like to take my time with this process, but how fast or how slow you might want to do this is going to depend on what works for you. But I like to settle in, take my time with what I'm about to do. I might even settle in with a cup of tea and really dedicate some time to my creativity and my inspirations. And what I do is I open up my sketchbook and I start leafing through it from start to finish, or from start to where I'm currently at in it. And I focus on things that interest me and start asking lots of what if questions and really sitting with the things that interest me, jump out at me, and asking questions to myself. And this can end up taking many forms for me. An element of a sketch might grab my attention, and by recognizing that that element jumped out at me, I can focus on it and start asking lots of what if questions to spark an idea. So I might be inspired by the buckle on a costume, I might be inspired by a facial expression, I might be really interested in the textures of a study. Like last year, I did some studies of stalactites and stalagmites after I visited a cave. And looking back at those, I've ended up being inspired for some potential creature ideas and also some background ideas for some illustrations as well. And that's one way that sitting with these might inspire me. Another way is that I might come across old thumbnails, old sketches that I want to redo in new ways, and I'll start asking what if questions in my mind to potentially come up with new iterations. It could be that I want to explore new iterations of the subject itself, so new versions of a character, new versions of their outfits, or new versions of a thumbnail for, say, like an animal illustration, different poses that I could do in the thumbnail instead, different compositions. Or I might come across an old sketch and wonder what it would be like in a different medium, or wonder what it might be like if I took it to a finish, so took it into an ink and watercolour or something. And that can be one way as well that I can become inspired by sitting down and looking through my sketchbooks and really taking my time to notice what is jumping out at me. And another thing that I may come across in this process as well is seeing studies, sketches, or a drawing and noticing that it's jumping out at me in some way, that it's interesting me in some way, and then sitting there and ideating potential illustrations or painting concepts for that sketch. And that's what I did with this page here. So some of you may remember that I went to the zoo to draw from life last summer, and also take lots of reference images to draw from as well at home. And I ended up drawing a rhino from life, and I also took some reference images of it as well. And looking back through this page, I noticed that the pose of it sleeping that I sketched was really, really grabbing my attention. As I was sat there looking at it, I ended up thinking of the rhino snoring in its sleep. But then I thought of how would I portray that? How would I portray that something is snoring or breathing heavily in a 2D image? And then because I thought that, I thought through movement of some kind. Well, how would I do that? What about if it's breaths or blowing on something nearby every time it's snoring or breathing heavily in its sleep? And then because I thought of that, I was like, oh, what about if it's blowing on dandelions nearby? Like you blow on dandelions and the seeds fly away. And that's how I ended up coming up with an idea for an ink and watercolour illustration that I just did. It was purely during one of these moments when I was looking through my old sketches. The second way that I use my old sketchbooks and old sketches is to preserve inspiration for later use and to keep a record of ideas that will keep me inspired even when ideas aren't popping into my mind on their own. It's tied somewhat to the first thing I talked about, and I do both together to preserve any ideas. Whenever I get an idea pop into my mind, it doesn't matter how detailed or how abstract, how ridiculous, how small, how grand, whatever it may be, I write down the idea. And I like to do this in my sketchbook most of the time. You don't have to do this in your sketchbook if you don't like writing in them. You could keep a dedicated space like a notebook, a digital document, whatever works for you. It doesn't matter where you choose to write it down. What matters is that it's a place that you use and a place that you go back to look through. Why would you write down your ideas? One reason is to take advantage of the ebbs and flows of creativity. Inspiration can be very fleeting sometimes, and it can also come in waves. And you may be in a moment of time where you're bombarded with ideas and you don't have the time or the energy to do all of the ideas that are coming to you at once. You might have time to do a handful of them, but you're absolutely bombarded with ideas. But if you record all of them, then you can ride that wave of ideas into the times when your creative mind isn't flowing with as many ideas. You can ride that flow into the ebbs by keeping the record. Another reason is to exercise your creative muscles. Creativity is a skill in its own right and requires training, just like drilling perspective or anatomy in your art studies. By constantly writing down and looking back at your ideas, you give yourself the opportunity to expand upon the ideas and refine them as well. You also get to learn about your creativity, see patterns in what you're interested in and what your sources of inspiration are as well. And a third reason is a very simple reason, and that's to just make sure you won't forget. You can tell yourself you won't forget it, but much like dreams, many ideas fade away with each passing hour and each passing day. If you record your ideas, you'll even notice this for yourself. The amount of times I've looked back through my sketchbooks or my notebook and I surprise myself thinking, oh wow, I forgot about that over and over and over again. So the third reason is very simple, but it is a very important one. Like I said earlier, I do both of these things in my art practice, and I find that they both feed into each other to help keep me inspired. And to kind of illustrate that with an example, I'll look through my sketchbooks and my sketches to come up with ideas, and as I come up with them, I'll record them. I'll pursue one or two of these ideas with new sketches, new illustrations, and so on, but I'll forget the rest of the ideas that I came up with. But then when I look back through that sketchbook or I look back through my record of ideas, I'll be inspired all over again with things that I recorded, and maybe new sketches will jump out at me to come up with new ideas as well. So both of them feed into each other, and I find both really, really helpful in my practice. And those are two ways out of a few different ways I use my sketchbooks and old sketches to help keep me inspired in my art practice. I hope that they were either interesting or helpful in some way to you. And again, I encourage you to experiment in your own practice and find what does and doesn't work for you. If you find that something doesn't work with you, that can be just as valuable as finding something that does, because you're figuring out your art practice by doing so. So take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And with that, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.